At some point, you stopped getting as invested. People just started mattering a little less than they used to. Their opinions landed lighter. Their absence bothered you less. You stopped checking in as much, stopped following up, stopped feeling the pull you once felt toward other people. And if someone asked, you'd have a reasonable explanation ready. You've been busy. You've grown. You've learned not to pour energy into people who don't reciprocate. You know your worth now. All of that might be true, but there's another possibility. That what feels like growth might also be the brain quietly building a wall. One it never asked your permission to build. One that went up so gradually you didn't notice it was there until it was already finished. This isn't about people who are visibly struggling, who feel lonely or isolated, or aware that something is wrong with how they relate to others. It's about the ones who seem fine, functional, independent, even admired for it. The person who doesn't get too attached, who handles things without needing much from anyone, who seems, from the outside, to have figured out something most people haven't, that depending on others is a liability, and that needing less is a kind of freedom. The withdrawal is invisible because it doesn't look like withdrawal. It looks like self-sufficiency, like standards, like the hard-earned wisdom of someone who has been let down enough times to know better. And that's exactly what makes it so difficult to examine. Because the brain doesn't announce what it's doing. It doesn't say, I've been hurt and I'm protecting myself by caring less. It says something that sounds considerably more evolved. I've simply learned who deserves my energy, which raises the question almost nobody thinks to ask. What if caring less isn't something that happened to you, but a policy your brain quietly adopted without your knowledge after deciding people weren't worth the risk? In the mid-20th century, psychiatrist John Bowlby proposed something that reframed how psychologists understood human relationships. People don't just experience connection, he argued, they build models of it. Based on accumulated interactions with others, how reliably they showed up, how consistently they responded, how safe it felt to need them, the brain constructs a working prediction of what people are like and what investing in them is likely to cost. When those experiences are largely positive, the model stays open. People are, on balance, worth the risk. When they aren't, when disappointment is frequent enough, when the people who were supposed to show up repeatedly didn't, the model updates. And the update doesn't feel like a wound, it feels like wisdom. Later researchers extended this into what they call deactivating strategies, the brain's method of managing repeated relational disappointment. Rather than continuing to reach toward connection and absorbing the cost of being let down, the brain begins suppressing the impulse to connect in the first place. It stops generating the desire before it can become a vulnerability. This doesn't feel like suppression. It feels like not needing people as much, like finally being okay on your own, like independence. But here's what almost never gets examined. What begins as a targeted response, protection from specific people who hurt you in specific contexts where trust was broken, gradually generalizes. The brain is efficient. It doesn't maintain fine-grained distinctions between the people who disappointed you and people in general. It updates the broader model. Caring less stops being a reaction to particular situations and becomes a quiet default, running in the background of every interaction, shaping every relationship, never announcing itself as a policy. The brain didn't stop caring because people stopped being worth caring about. It stopped caring because it learned from enough accumulated evidence that caring was a cost it could no longer justify. Here's where things get tricky. The language the brain uses to justify the withdrawal is almost identical to the language of genuine growth. I know my worth. I don't need external validation. I've learned who deserves my energy. These sound like the conclusions of someone who has done real psychological work, and sometimes they are, but sometimes they're the output of a protection strategy that quietly expanded beyond its original purpose, a wall built for specific people that now faces everyone, a policy written in response to genuine hurt that now governs interactions with people who haven't hurt you yet, and may never. The uncomfortable truth is that you can't always tell the difference from the inside. Genuine self-sufficiency and learned emotional avoidance feel nearly identical. Both involve needing less. Both involve being less affected by people. The only real distinction is whether the door is still open or whether the brain quietly locked it and handed you a philosophy to explain why that was the right decision. So, should you start caring more about people? Maybe, maybe not. The withdrawal made sense when it started. The brain was responding to something real. The hurt was real. The people who made caring feel costly were real. The protection wasn't irrational. But protection has a way of outlasting its original purpose, of quietly becoming permanent long after the specific threat that created it has passed, of expanding from a targeted response into a general condition, one that shapes how you show up with everyone, not just the people who made it necessary. And that's the part that's important. Not guilt, not the pressure to suddenly become more open or more available or more willing to be hurt, but with honest curiosity about when the policy was written, who it was written for, and whether it was ever actually updated, or whether it's just been running unexamined ever since. Because there's a difference between choosing not to care and never having been asked.
You should watch this video next. I think you will like it.